Quinton Devlin, welcome to ASPI. Why is RAMSI leaving? Why is RAMSI departing the Solomon Islands?
Thanks very much, Graham. It's great to be here. RAMSI is leaving because it's achieved its mandate. RAMSI was invited into the Solomon Islands in 2003 by the Solomon Islands government and the Parliament to restore law and order, to stabilise the country's finances, and to help restart and reset the national institutions.
And would you say you've done all those three things?
I would say we've done all those three things. When RAMSI arrived in the Solomon Islands, the country was in decline. It was calamitous. The economy was collapsing. It was heading towards state failure, and guns and lawlessness was rampant.
Now, but Solomon's really was staring into the abyss when that call went out. It was staring at ethnic conflict, nearly a civil war. It was certainly looking at something that looked very much like state failure. What have the people and the polity of Solomon's rebuilt in that 14 years? What is the achievement of Solomon Islands?
I think the Solomon Islands have achieved a lot in a very, very short period of time. It's been 14 years and really 14 short years where they have been able to, through peace in their heart, and I know that's a funny thing to say, but with a commitment to peace and stability, have been able to restore peace and stability, have been to find ways to live and work together. And there have been a significant group of hard-working, decent public servants that have rebuilt the economy and rebuilt the public service and worked with RAMSI to bring peace and stability to the country.
How much would you say that this was an Australian-led effort, and how much was it Australia and the rest of the forum? How much was this, in a way, a South Pacific set of solutions that Australia was helping to implement?
I think it was very much a regional organisation and effort led by Australia. The original requests came to Australia, but Australia was very keen to make sure that it was endorsed by the region, drawn from the region and monitored by the region. And that was part of the conditions around which Australia agreed to lead the regional assistance mission to Solomon Islands. And what that meant was that particularly the military and the participating police force of RAMSI, they were very much reflected the 15 nations of the Pacific Islands Forum. The civilian development component was drawn largely from Australia and New Zealand, but nonetheless, RAMSI deliberately and consciously went out and sought to recruit Pacific Islanders to fill that role, because RAMSI's regional makeup has been one of its core strengths. It's been able to help us as an organisation to understand the Solomon Islands. It's helped us to build that rapport with the communities and our counterpart ministries. It's also helped us to, as you say, create or suggest Pacific-style solutions for Pacific-style problems.
One of the key achievements was the disarmament, so that only RAMSI had weapons in Solomon Islands. How big a call was it to decide to rearm the Solomons police?
Rearmament has been very important, but it has been very much a slow process. And for a number of years, RAMSI was indeed recommending against rearmament. It was once we saw that the Solomon Islands had a good foundation of policing and had some greater integrity in the police force itself, that we were comfortable. And it wasn't RAMSI's decision to rearm the police, it was the decision of the Solomon Islands government. But it was what was called a staged and limited rearmament program. It was staged in the sense that it was taken very slowly and very deliberately. It was limited in the sense that only 2 specialist units in the police force, so less than 10% of the police force will be rearmed. Your average Solomon Islander police officer on the streets will not be rearmed. There are a couple of reasons why rearmament are important. One is the Solomon Islands has some international obligations to provide security at international airport, an international obligation also to protect visiting dignitaries. But there are still, notwithstanding the very, very successful disarmament program in 2003, there are still some guns in the community, and therefore it's important for the Solomon Islands police force to have what in police terms you call lethal oversight, but essentially so that they can defend the communities and the borders and waters of the Solomon Islands from armed offenders. There's also an extra element which is crocodile management. One of the consequences of disarmament in 2003 is that the population of crocodiles has increased over time. And so there is a need for an organisation to be in a position to manage crocodile populations.
So RAMSI has to do crocodile duty at the moment?
That is one of our roles. So we have a tactical special response group who are there just in case. They're a backup organisation should the Solomon Islands ever need some armed assistance. But very pleasingly, we haven't used them for a very long time in an operational capacity. But because we are still today the only organisation permitted to carry weapons, we do have a role in playing in crocodile population management. But we also use it as an opportunity to also talk to Solomon Islanders throughout the country about RAMSI and why we're leaving and why we have confidence in the police and what will follow RAMSI.
During the crisis, the Solomons Police were seen as an arm of one of the militias. How much now is Solomon Islands ready to trust its own police force?
Both the Solomon Islands government, representatives from the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of Police and the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force itself, plus RAMSI, have been touring the country for many years, but we've been doing that in a much more stepped up way over the last few months. And as I said, we're explaining why RAMSI is leaving and why we believe that people should have trust in the police and what will follow RAMSI. One of the questions we get is quite commonly is, can we really trust the police? And we say absolutely. We point to their performance over the last 4 years when they themselves have been doing frontline policing for the last 4 years. Their capacity to deal with complex security operations. Their very appropriate focus on crime prevention and community policing and partnering with the community to maintain law and order across the country. We also point to the government's incremental increases in the police budget. So the police have over the last few years been better resourced. We also point to that we've been training them for 14 years, and after 14 years of training, they are now a very competent and increasingly modern and sophisticated and disciplined force. The Royal Solomon Islands Police Force are no longer just recipients of training. They're now actually offering training and supporting the region. So countries like Samoa and Nauru and Vanuatu are now coming to the Solomon Islands for assistance. This is how far they come. They're not coming to Australia, not coming to New Zealand. They're seeking the support of the Solomon Islands to improve their services. And we also see the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force now in a position where it can support the region itself. So it sent a patrol boat and officers to Vanuatu after Cyclone Pam. We're also seeing the Solomon Islands preparing its second contingent to go to Darfur as part of the United Nations policing mission. So these are all very good, strong indicators that the RSIPF now are ready to handle policing and national security in their own nation.
For the Pacific Islands Forum, RAMSI was far and away the biggest security strategic effort they've ever made, the biggest thing, in a way, the forum has ever attempted. What has the RAMSI experience meant for the region? What sort of frame or what sort of lessons does it offer to the South Pacific?
I think the number one thing is that RAMSI has helped make the region safer. We now have a stable country in our midst. But more broader than that, I think the RAMSI mission has allowed greater linkages and networks and understanding between the police and the military networks and the civilian advisors and the diplomats amongst the Pacific Islands Forum. We also see, for example, or people tell me that from police executives around the region now saying that they greatly appreciated the fact that their officers were able to be part of RAMSI, and they were exposed to different approaches and different ways of thinking and different methods of policing that they have now been able to take back and tailor back in their own home countries.
Australia spent well over $2 billion on RAMSI. What did Australia get for its $2 billion?
A secure neighbourhood. Australia has been able to bring a country back from the brink. Well, I shouldn't say Australia, the region, an Australian-led region, and it was in all of our interests that one of our closest neighbours was stable, was and is now a productive and useful contributor to the region.
There's a lot of debate in the region about what Australia's role in the South Pacific is. Does this experience mean there is an acceptance of Australia as the security guarantor and as some sort of security leader?
I think RAMSI is a good example of what actually foreign ministers talked about as a shining example of Pacific diplomacy and cooperation. So it does show that Australia can bring together a coalition of nations and can, when the call comes, can respond. So I think Australia probably is perceived as, in many parts of the region, as a security partner of choice.
Not always the most comfortable position to be, that leadership role. The problem for Australia in the Pacific is often that it offers leadership, but it doesn't always get much fellowship. Do you think that the RAMSI experience will have some continuing impact on the way Australia is perceived and its leadership ambitions in the Pacific?
I think RAMSI is an example where it's not so much about Australia, it's more about the region working together. Australia does have greater resources than some other members of the Pacific region, and therefore it is natural that countries may turn to Australia in the region. But RAMSI from the very beginning and Australia's position was always that it was very important to deal with the dire humanitarian issues that were unfolding in the Solomon Islands in the late 90s and early 2000s. But equally, it was a regional responsibility, and Australia was always very keen to work with the region, and that was the way it occurred. From the first day of RAMSI, I think it was 10 countries. By 2006, we had all 15 Pacific Island foreign nations that were contributing to RAMSI. And today, or on the final day of RAMSI, all those 15 nations will continue to be there as well.
Finally, Quinton, the South Pacific, I think, always has an ability to take hold of anyone who goes there. What would you personally take away from your time living and working in Solomon Islands?
I've loved my time in the Solomon Islands. I think it's a fascinating place, a beautiful place. The people are wonderful and warm. It's also got its challenges, and it's always it's a privilege and honour to be there and to in partnership work with the people and the governments of Solomon Islands to help them find their way forward, to find their path through history. And I think it's been great fun working with all the Pacific Island nations. They bring so much richness and diversity and differing views and opinions, and there's a collective sense of pride, particularly in RAMSI, of what we've been able to achieve. But we couldn't have done it without the Solomon Islands, and I think for me to be part of that small part of the rebuilding of Solomon Islands, that's a great honour.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.